Hello everyone and welcome to the global release of the 2022 World Watch List. I'm David Curry, CEO of Open Doors USA, and in just a moment I'm going to be sharing the stories and historic findings of the World Watch List. The World Watch List is the best research of its kind. It's on the ground, expert consensus about what's happening around the world to Christians who are targeted simply for their faith. We measure pressure, intolerance, and violence against Christian faith worldwide. Now, following my remarks, we're going to be taking questions. You can text your questions along with your name and media outlet to the number on your screen, 251-281-8254. The World Watch List is also available online at opendoorsusa.org, and immediately following this press conference, it'll be there. Supporting data, supplemental materials are all also available, and we're so grateful for your attendance. Now to the report. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2022 World Watch List reveals the most seismic changes in the history of our research. For the first time ever, Afghanistan is the most dangerous place on the planet to be a Christian, coming in at number 1 on the World Watch List. It has supplanted North Korea, which is now number 2 for the first time in 20 years. But I want to be absolutely clear, North Korea has not gotten better. Afghanistan has gotten worse. Our data shows that free societies, those who protect freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly, are now facing a war against hatred and discrimination on 2 separate fronts. The one battle is against tribal, religious, and nationalistic extremists that's sweeping the globe, and there's a second battle against authoritarian regimes who are deploying sophisticated systems of surveillance, censorship, and punishment of anyone who believes or worships outside of a strictly enforced boundary. To illustrate this, on August 15th of the past year, as the government of Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, a young woman named Zabi fled for her life and went into hiding. Now, Zabi is an amazing young woman. She's well-educated, she's diligent, she's honest, the sort of citizen everybody would want. Yet she represents tens of thousands of people who, although she loves her country of Afghanistan and wants nothing more than a good life for herself and her family, they're considered outcasts and enemies of the state by the Taliban. What is her crime? Well, according to the Taliban, it's twofold. First, she's a woman, and most dangerously, and second, she's a Christian. Zabi told us that she, along with her father and brother, became secret believers in Afghanistan just a few years ago. And now, with the Taliban beginning to impose their extremist interpretation of Sharia law, her existence is in question. She told Open Doors this: "A few years ago, the Taliban came and they took my father away because he was a Christian. They tortured him for months and then killed him. A few months later, my brother also disappeared, and we've never heard from her again." So it's no doubt that she knows where her fate is, and thus she and her mother are now on the run. She continued on and she said this: "Our situation right now, today, is desperate. I have money in my bank account, but I can't access it from here. I have a visa, but it's going to expire soon. What will happen to me? I don't know." And then she said this, and it breaks my heart. I hope it touches yours. She said, "I feel alone and hopeless." Today, religious extremists and the governments they control or influence lead the World Watch List for the first time. Extremism and tribalism are skyrocketing, and so are the related incidents of harassment against Christians. 9 of the top 10 countries on the World Watch List are run or influenced by radical Islamists or Hindu extremists. Only North Korea, number 2, is the exception, and it is run by a murderous dictator with a communist ideology. Today, we must examine the causes and conditions highlighted on the World Watch List so that we can understand how intolerance is growing and spreading, and also how we can stand and advocate for religious freedom. If we do so, we can build and support communities and nations where religious freedom is enjoyed and human rights, all human rights, are protected, so that people don't have to live in fear simply because they practice their Christian faith. Our report shows that 360 million Christians globally now suffer high levels of persecution and discrimination. That's 1 in 7 Christians worldwide. Today, I want to highlight just 3 major trends from our research today. The first is that Islamic extremism around the world has been galvanized by the Taliban's victory in Afghanistan and that Christians are paying the consequences. In September, shortly after the Taliban seized control, a list was circulated with the names of prominent Christians. Somehow, this list fell into the hands of the Taliban. Those listed were among the first to be hunted. Why? Well, because the Taliban's interpretation of Islam considers Christians to be traitors, enemies of the state, enemies of the tribe and community. They are infidels from Islam. And in their mind, the punishment is death. So is it any wonder that so many people dramatically risk their lives to escape? Recently, we spoke with a refugee who escaped on one of the last planes out of Kabul. We're going to show a clip of his audio, but his face is not shown to protect him and his family. And we've asked him what it was like to be a Christian in Afghanistan.
I'm a refugee and also a believer from Afghanistan. It's very dangerous because, we're living in an Islamic country that the law is saying if you leave your faith, your punishment is death. Like when I became a believer, one of my friends took out all my money in the business, and when I say why you did that, he said if you complain, I will tell everyone that you are a believer. So every people in Afghanistan, they experience this persecution in different ways. Yeah, it's very hard when you want to have freedom of faith and freely read our Bible, freely share our faith. Always there is a big, huge fear in our heart about our safety, our family safety, and it's very heavy. Like you're always living inside a cage. You are always limited. You have always a fear in your heart.
While his experience as a Christian husband and father is harrowing, unfortunately, it's not unique. Every Christian who remains in the country of Afghanistan is either on the run or in hiding. We then asked him about his experience with the Taliban, and his response was startling.
So we got informed through our leaders that, they are looking for people. Some of the Afghan believers, they received calls from the Taliban. And then they start home searching in some area close to my neighborhood. They used to come at night. They start searching house of people and fighting at the night. About being any Christian now in Afghanistan, you are the first target for Taliban and for the people. If they find out about you, it's a death warrant for you. You are the main target. They fulfill that law on you because they said if you left Islam, your punishment is death.
Remarkably, but all too common according to the World Watchlist data, Christian women are especially vulnerable in Afghanistan. For this very reason, and in our experience, the number one reason that Christians left Afghanistan was to protect their families. One Afghan Christian told Open Doors this, and I quote, "The Taliban are going door to door and snatching young girls and destroying families. God alone knows who has informed them about the whereabouts and identities of the believers. If they find us, they kill believers on the spot." Our Afghan refugee friend describes his family's experience.
And I knew that when Taliban get over, my wife will lose many rights and freedom. Yeah, before also the freedom was limited, but maybe she lose more of her freedom. And I couldn't bear that problem and that pain to see her always be in fear and stress.
To be clear, Christians are not the only ones suffering in Afghanistan. The New York Times reported that more than half of the country's population is facing life-threatening food insecurity this winter. Many of the nearly 38 million Afghan citizens are suffering economically from lack of food and health care, and all of them should be considered hostages of the Taliban. Since the takeover, Afghanistan has suffered the further destruction of their financial, healthcare, employment, and educational system. According to the World Bank in 2003, shortly after the Taliban were expelled from Afghanistan, around 3.6% of girls attended secondary school. Now, after 2 decades of non-Taliban rule, that number rose to 40%. Now, today, almost all secondary schools are closed to girls. Progress made over the last 2 decades on rights and protections for women has dramatically deteriorated since the Taliban took over. Persecution of Christian women is facilitated by the marginalization of women in society, with female Christians made vulnerable not only to divorce, but also being placed under house arrest. And then they are sold sometimes into slavery or prostitution, often beaten or forced to marry a Muslim. The lack of an impartial justice system leaves victims with no legal recourse, and even reporting the human rights abuses is discouraged because of the cultural stigma and lack of any governmental support. The world must speak out on the horrendous mistreatment of women in extremist Islamic societies, and in particular, wake up to the fact that Christian women are the most vulnerable group in the world today. With the Taliban in charge, countries like Somalia, Iran, Pakistan are less stable, and Islamic extremists are emboldened. The second trend I want to highlight is that of China and its model of using centralized government control to suppress and exterminate the free practice of religion of all kinds. China is number 17 this year on the World Watch List, yet it is leading the way on centralizing control. Other countries are now seeking to replicate its methodology. China's high-tech news is slowly choking the free expression of Christian faith and the faith of Muslims and other religious minorities. As some of you, I hope, will recall from past World Watch List reports, China is using a blanket of surveillance monitored by artificial intelligence to watch the movements of people of faith. It's even using facial recognition to monitor those who enter places of worship. Slowly, ever so slowly, inch by inch, this noose is tightening around religious faith in China. New laws are being passed to enforce and restrict the teachings of Jesus. China recently implemented additional restrictions on Christian Bibles and literature online, for example. Only groups that recognize the Communist Party of China and their censorship over sermons and Bibles will be allowed to distribute the scripture. What that means in a practical way is that soon 100 million followers of Jesus in China will be subjected to Bibles that have key elements removed or changed because they conflict with communist dogma. There's no more precious book to Christians than the Bible, and this aggression is most grave. I asked Ambassador Sam Brownback, former U.S. Ambassador for International Religious Freedom and now a senior fellow at Open Doors USA, whether China's abuses can be countered, and here's what he had to say.
We have to take effective action against the authoritarian regime in Beijing. As a leader in Tibet once told me, either the world will change China or China will change the world. And I believe it's that dramatic, and I think that's really what's at stake. Either the world's going to look a lot more like China and what the communist dictators are doing, or it's going to look a lot more like Western democracy. And we're really at one of those key pivot points in history. Who's going to win? And it's not clear. China's out very aggressive now with her Belt and Road strategy, putting billions of dollars into these places, pulling people into their sphere, saying that any human rights violation is fine, it's whatever you choose to do on your own soil. They are the biggest enabler of human rights abuses around the world, and we're the biggest defender of human rights around the world.
In China, churches are also being forced to disband and break into small pieces or go underground. This past year was the 100th anniversary of the Communist Chinese Party, and President Xi pushed hard to project this impression that people love the Communist Party more than any personality, group, school of thought, or faith. But he's uniquely concerned with Christian churches. So China is cracking down on attending services. Most churches in China that meet or have met in commercial buildings have now become invisible. We estimate that around 80% of churches have been pressured into fracturing into small groups, going underground, or going online. I asked Ambassador Brownback how we can address this.
And then I think we need to directly confront China on its persecution of people of faith, like we did the Soviet Union on its persecution of Jews and evangelicals. And we need to delegitimize the Chinese Communist Party. Here's been a party that hasn't stood for an election ever, that's been in power for 70 years in China, is dictatorial, has taken over large swatches of land in Tibet and Xinjiang and in other places, Mongolia, and you could certainly argue Hong Kong now as well, without authority, just taking them over. And I think we need to really question the very nature of this regime. I think we undermine them as well as we point out they are for religious persecution and for holding everybody down, no matter what your faith journey is, and we're for religious freedom. You practice whatever faith you want. As long as you peacefully practice it, you're welcome to practice it.
With China's centralized control of the internet, even church online isn't free. Data and artificial intelligence, it's easier for them to monitor religious services and discussions. Online services did flourish for a brief moment during the early days of the COVID pandemic, but now it's monitored and shut down if it extends beyond a few dozen people. The official Church of China, which is called the Three Self Church, it's recognized by the state, cannot meet online at all. Some churches have gone online, but we have to be clear that pastoral care and spiritual growth, not to mention the human connection, are less effective online. That's true not just in China, but everywhere, including the United States. People of faith should have the freedom to meet together in person or online and to peacefully practice their faith in community. Perhaps even more shocking, and reported and confirmed by the Washington Post and others, is that China is exporting a major part of its internal data surveillance network to mine Western social media, including Facebook and Twitter. And they're targeting foreign dissidents, including journalists and Uyghur Muslims living abroad and in the USA. Which means if you write or share an article about the World Watch List today and mention China, they're listening to you. We saw what happened when Nike and H&M faced a boycott in China over their refusal to use cotton collected by forced labor in Xinjiang province. So make no mistake, there's a cost for confronting China. But I have a responsibility to do so, and every journalist, every advocate, every person of faith has that same responsibility. China needs to hear the world's outrage. Are you courageous enough to let them hear your voice? What then is the reason? What's the strategy behind this slow strangulation of religious expression? Simply put, President Xi and the Communist Party sees religion as a threat because it's not aligned with the values of the Chinese state. I asked Ambassador Brownback what could be done, and here's what he had to say.
It's got to be a bipartisan recognition. This can't be just where Republicans say we're in Cold War and the Democrats say no. It's got to be a national decision, like it was during the Soviet confrontation that we had for those decades against the Soviet Union, that we're going to stand up, and it's going to be, doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or a Democrat administration, we will stand up to this authoritarian regime in China. And thankfully that's taken place. President Trump started a lot of this fight. President Biden has continued it. And we need it to be that way, of a bipartisan nature, that it continues from administration to administration.
Because China is selling their technology and expertise to other countries to centralize control, the free world must challenge them before they extinguish all vestiges of free expression. This year's Winter Olympics, which begins February 4th in Beijing, are but one example of how China is using sports, money, and investment in infrastructure around the world to whitewash their human rights violations. We must and we have to see this for what it is. I applaud the Biden administration for taking a stand on this. They have a diplomatic boycott of his administration attending the Olympics due to the human rights violations of China. And today, Open Doors USA is the largest, most permanent Christian advocacy group in America focused on religious freedom, is calling on every Christian in our nation to join this boycott of the Olympics in the name of our persecuted brothers and sisters in China. Let's remember, though, that China's not just attacking Christians. They've imprisoned millions of ethnic Uyghur Muslims. These are not terrorists or extremists. And they're sterilizing them, and using them as forced labor. I encourage every corporation and individual to examine whether their products are produced in areas of China where they're using the forced labor of Uyghur Muslims. Now, as a Christian, I think all Christians have the duty to speak the truth about these atrocities and act to stop them. We must speak out, we must act, and now's the time. Third and last trend I want to mention to you is highlight what's happening in Nigeria and the African Sahel region, that middle band of the African continent. It is now the epicenter of jihadi violence against Christians. Two women, Faith and Damaris, young Christian women, had their family home raided by Fulani extremists. They were kidnapped, raped, and held captive, and they feared for their very lives. When we found them and brought them for trauma care, their stories and experiences that they shared were tragic beyond imagination. Our World Watch List data has consistently tracked the growing violence against Christians in the north of Nigeria. But now, as predicted, that violence has crossed every border and become a larger regional issue. We can document that 4,650 Christians were killed during the previous reporting period in Nigeria. Those are just those that we know of and can report. These are human beings tracked, targeted, raped, and killed because they were Christians. The regional violence is even greater. Burkina Faso was not even on the World Watch List a few years ago. Now it's number 32 and rising. Mali is number 24, Niger number 33, Cameroon number 44. All countries affected in that Sahel region of Africa. We spoke with Open Doors analyst for Nigeria, Ilya Jadi, about the regional goals of Boko Haram and the Fulani militants.
We have seen an explosion of violence and Islamist insurgency now affecting sub-Saharan Africa. Radical Islam has become now the main persecution engine, and we have seen an explosion of violence now affecting the central Sahel region, affecting northeastern Nigeria around Lake Chad Basin, but also other regions of the continent. East Africa with the Somalia-led Al-Shabaab, but also now in the Central African region, across what is called the Great Lake regions, there is also another Islamist insurgency, the ADF, the Allied Democratic Forces, which is linked, affiliated to Islamic State, but also now moving down this Islamist insurgency affecting the southern part of the continent. The northern province of Cabo Delgado in northern Mozambique is now also affected by Islamist insurgency. So there is an expansion, there's an explosion of Islamist insurgency.
Boko Haram and Fulani extremists seek to control vast resources and human capital. It's a region the size of Switzerland or Belgium. In response to this aggression, it must be said, however, that the Nigerian government has totally failed its people. Mr. Jadi says more on that subject.
Well, the President Muhammadu Buhari was elected in 2015 with the pledge and the promise to, he said, according to his word, to eradicate Boko Haram. Because of his military background, he's a former retired army general. He was elected with the aim from Nigerian citizens to eradicate this issue of Boko Haram. And after a few years, he claimed that Boko Haram has been technically defeated. But over times, so far, we can see that Boko Haram is still active. Boko Haram is still capable to operate, to carry out deadly attacks, targeting military positions, but also civilians.
Our research is irrefutable proof that Nigeria's human rights violations must be recognized by the U.S. government and the State Department and every country that values freedom of conscience and religious freedom. They must put Nigeria back on the State Department's list of countries of particular concern. Mr. Jadi, our Open Doors analyst, continues.
The situation is dramatic. Try to compare what is happening in Nigeria and in neighboring countries, particularly from Niger. We can see that the state response can make a big difference. The way the state is dealing with this insurgency can make a big difference. And it's the primary responsibility of the state to ensure protection for all. Security has become a big issue in Nigeria. People are traveling and fearing for their own lives, fearing of being kidnapped, killed. Children can't go to school. More than 1,000 children, school children, kidnapped. Some killed at school. So going to school has become a matter of life or death. It shouldn't be like this. Nobody should be killed on the way, or children, because they are going to school. So again, it's the primary responsibility of the state to ensure protection to all Nigerian citizens, and particularly the most vulnerable ones. There is hope, but again, all depends on the state response at federal level, but also at state level.
The extremist faction of the Fulani are not simple farmers, as some outlets have reported. They are militants with an extremist ideology, attacking Christians, raping young women, just like Faith in Damaris. This isn't, however, to say that Nigeria and the African Sahel region is the only place of violence against Christians. India, the world's largest democracy, continues to shock the world with its intolerance towards Christians and other religious minorities, coming in again at number 10 on the World Watch List. Though it's ostensibly a free democracy, at least 1,310 Christians were unlawfully detained for faith-related reasons in India last year. That's up from just 72 the prior year. Even that was too high. And there's been an 18% rise in reported deaths against Christians in India as well. But Hindu extremists are also escalating calls to kill Muslims. Just this very week, India's Supreme Court read a petition calling this offense, and I quote, an open call for murder of an entire community. The World Watch List 2022 shows that there is, in fact, a two-front war against the freedom of religion for Christians. One front, religious extremists emboldened by the passivity of the global community. Secondly, growing in power and sophistication is China and others who can use technology to surveil and restrict religious practice. We need people of faith and nations who honor freedom of expression, freedom of religion, free speech, to share and discuss this World Watch List. Share it on social media, in your churches, discuss it in your parliaments and your places of Congress. I remind you of this: every single person deserves the freedom to have their own core set of beliefs about faith and to practice their faith peacefully. This report highlights incidents of harassment, oppression, and violence against Christian faith, but it also illustrates the challenges to freedom of conscience and expression for all people, whether they have a religious faith or consider themselves an atheist, or just have different views from the majority of their culture or the ruling party of their government. Just weeks ago, I was in Western Asia meeting with a family that had escaped Iran, which is number 9 on the World Watch List because of religious persecution. Their faith was vibrant, and the love of Jesus had totally transformed their family. The father had struggled with drug and alcohol abuse, and their marriage was in tatters. The family's fracturing. And then they had this religious, spiritual experience, and they began to read the Bible. Their family slowly began to rebuild, and they began to attend underground Bible studies. One day, that Bible study was raided. The husband was brutally beaten and in prison. And when he was released months later, they began to understand their only hope was to escape. There are too many families like this who love their country, love their culture, never want to leave, yet they're forced by extremists and governments of intolerance to flee. Some never make it. They're killed for their faith. But I don't think we should lose hope. According to our refugee friend, there's even hope for Afghanistan. Here's what he had to say.
There is love of Jesus working in Afghanistan. This is what I want every American knows, that despite of what they heard in the news about the regime, the mullahs, the people, they like to have a lovely relationship with everyone, with the Jews, with the Christians, with every nationality.
In many places, the church is still growing despite persecution. Although the church is getting pressured in China, for example, it's maturing as well. And people are taking more active leadership over the discipleship of their families. People are treasuring Scripture more, even when it's illegal. People are loving and caring for each other, even without the government approval to do so. In pandemics, in economic deprivation, these are lessons we can all benefit from. There's hope, even in great darkness. And we also have hope for the future of religious freedom, largely because of people like you who are speaking up on behalf of religious minorities and because of a coalition of leadership that are committed to taking decisive action. One of those key leaders is Rashad Hussain. He's the newly confirmed Ambassador for International Religious Freedom at the State Department. It's our privilege to have Ambassador Hussain join us today. I hope you'll listen closely to his comments, and after this, we'll take questions.
Greetings from the State Department. I'm Rashad Hussain, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. I appreciate the opportunity to address you on this important occasion as Open Doors USA announces its 2022 World Watch List, a vital tool for those working to expand respect for freedom of religion or belief. I'm honored to participate in this event with Dr. David Curry and my predecessor, Open Doors USA Senior Fellow Ambassador Sam Brownback, whose efforts on behalf of international religious freedom are lauded by people across the faith spectrum. He has done so much to rally the globe in support of freedom of religion, and I'm honored to pick up his mantle. This is my first opportunity in this role to address our civil society partners and share how much we value the hard work by Open Doors and other non-governmental organizations in monitoring religious freedom around the world and speaking out for those who are silenced. Open Doors shines an important light on the persecution of the church around the world. In too many places, Christians suffer for their faith. As is evident from the People's Republic of China's ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang, its serious human rights abuses of a number of religious minorities have only intensified. Iran and North Korea have imprisoned thousands because of their beliefs. The State Department's International Religious Freedom Reports cite Open Doors' vital research on each of these countries as well as many others. Thank you for your tireless advocacy over the last 6 decades, building on Brother Andrew's vision. This administration stands with you on the importance of freedom of religion or belief and advocating for the most vulnerable and persecuted. President Biden, Secretary Blinken, and I are united in our commitment to protecting and advancing the freedom to do so. This goes to the heart of what it means to be human, to think freely, to follow our conscience, to change our beliefs if our hearts and minds lead us to do so, to express those beliefs in public and in private. People everywhere are entitled to it no matter where they live, what they believe, or what they don't believe. We stand in defense of religious freedom not only as an expression of our deepest values, but also because it is a vital national security priority. This repression that stifles religious freedom undermines political stability and economic development. Without religious freedom, people aren't able to make their fullest contribution to their country's successes. And whenever governments try to deny this human right, it ignites tension and it breeds division. The challenge is considerable. More than 80% of the world's population lives in countries restricting religious freedom. As the president has indicated, the good news is that the United States is not acting alone in upholding freedom of religion across the globe. When we join with our like-minded partners to defend it, using every diplomatic tool at our disposal, our efforts intensify the pressure on persecuting regimes and can produce real change. Today, the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance now boasts 33 member nations, with more expected to join this year. Members of the alliance have signed on to a declaration that everyone has freedom to believe or not believe, to change faith, to meet alone for prayer or corporately for worship. In the last few months alone, the alliance has spoken out forcefully against repression of Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide, Christians and other religious minorities at risk in Afghanistan, and of other oppressed religious minorities in several other countries. Strong diplomatic and political measures often follow these statements. Separately, we are pleased that other nations have built upon the successes of the first annual Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom, which began in DC in 2018, with the UK hosting the 4th iteration this July. This event brings together senior government leaders and civil society representatives from around the world to discuss ways to better advocate for freedom of religion or belief for all people, while also promoting and protecting the related rights of freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. In closing, let me again thank Open Doors USA and Dr. Curry for this opportunity and for all of your determined efforts in this area. I look forward to the day we can safely meet in person, but I trust that you'll continue to look to me and my team as your partners in this vital effort. Please stay in touch. Thank you.
We look forward to working with Ambassador Hussein and others to turn the tide towards religious freedom for all people everywhere. So thank you so much, Ambassador. Okay, I'm now going to take your questions. If you've texted them, you certainly can to the number on the screen there. And I'll do my very best to answer. If I miss something, of course, that's entirely possible. I apologize in advance. We have a question from Adele Banks of Religion News Service. She says, can you briefly explain the scoring by which you determined the top 10 list and why Afghanistan is first and North Korea second, even though North Korea's score increased? It's a great question. North Korea has been number one for many years, and Afghanistan has only been a point or two behind it. What you have now is a situation where both of the countries, totally different environments, of course, are increasing their persecution of Christians. But what's happening in Afghanistan is a crackdown. The government of North Korea has been in charge. They continue to keep high levels and growing levels of persecution. But the Taliban has been going door to door, seeking out Christians, as I mentioned briefly in my speech. So that element, this crackdown on Christians and the instability around the takeover by the Taliban, has increased the persecution. Particularly, all the scores are the same except in the area of violence. We measure the World Watch List as a whole in multiple spheres. We want to know what's it like in the private sphere of life for an individual. What's it like in their family? In some cultures, there's a great shame to change from your faith to become a follower of Jesus or any other faith. So the family can put pressure on. We rank that. The national sphere, what does the government do? Are they using the border police? Are they using the other means of the government to pressure religious expression of Christians? So there are multiple areas that we measure. They're the same in North Korea and Afghanistan until you get to violence. And this year, the violence has been more dramatic in Afghanistan. So thank you, Adele. I hope that helps you. Another question, what is boycotting the Olympics that you're asking Christians in the USA to do? Is that like not watching it on TV? It's unclear what you're asking people to do. Thank you for the question. If I'm unclear, I'm sorry. That's probably often the case, too often. The answer is that the government of China is using sports, and they have other levers in business. They're using what Ambassador Brownback called this Belt and Road project. They invest money across Africa, in other countries, other continents, as leverage to get people to overlook their human rights violations. And they're doing the same thing. They're seeking attention to whitewash what they're doing to the Uyghur Muslims and Christians in China. And we need to starve them of the attention that they want. So yes, I am suggesting that people don't watch the Olympics, that they don't participate in whatever way they normally would, which is a shame considering these heroic athletes that take part. It's not a reflection on them. But certainly the communist government wants the attention and the revenue from these Olympics, and I think people should just pass, particularly people of faith. Another question. Let's see here. Wow, lots of them here. Which factors are driving religious discrimination in India, given that it's a democracy and ostensibly a pluralistic society? Well, yes, India is a democracy. In 2014, Prime Minister Modi became head of their government. He is part of what is termed the BJP party. This is a group of nationalistic Hindu followers, and what they have done is they have given a nationalistic view on things, which essentially says you are not a true Indian citizen unless you are a Hindu. And that has emboldened mob groups around the country, and we've seen this dramatic increase in violence. So it's mobs attacking churches, beating individuals, imprisoning of pastors without trial if they have a small group in these more rural villages. It's not complete over the entire country. There are some sectors which have more violence against Christians than others, but it is the responsibility of this government and their Hindu nationalistic move, and which is totally at odds with what most Americans believe and know about the Indian people and their history of peaceful coexistence with each other. And they're also, as I mentioned, cracking down on Muslim faith as well. So I don't think this is a good sign, and I don't like to see it happen. And we are certainly calling on the U.S. government, even though this is a great international partner, and I can see lots of reasons why we want to have friends with them. We should not let our friends commit these kinds of human rights abuses, and we have to call them on it. Saudi Arabia jumped from number 14, next question, to number 11. They are one of the U.S.'s main allies in the Middle East. How can it be so high on the Middle East, and why is the government supporting the Saudi monarchy? The U.S. government obviously has a role of what has been called realpolitik, where it's trying to balance the tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and oftentimes they overlook Saudi human rights violations, not just against Christians, but minorities as well. The reality is that there's no freedom of religious expression in Saudi Arabia. The violence is low because the Christians are largely underground, and there are no public churches that can be attacked. And we have to admit that the culture there is a strong Islamic culture that would see great shame in somebody becoming a follower of Jesus and making up their own mind about what they think for their faith. So there are numbers of factors there which have increased in Saudi Arabia and make it more difficult, okay? China remains number 17 on the World Watch List in the 2022 list, the same score it received last year. How do you explain the outsized impact it has on international religious freedom when its World Watch List rank is relatively low? And do you think that Winter Olympics will continue to contribute to the rise in China's rank? Well, I don't know. We always rank based on the actual events that we can measure, so it's hard to say what will happen next year. But what we know is that the drivers are in place. They are putting into place right now a series of actions which they frankly have signaled over the years. And as each of these comes online, first there's a social score, then they began to set up their camera systems and they implement artificial intelligence. So when you walk into church, they know you're there, they're keeping the score, and they're saying David is not as good of a communist as some others because he went to church twice this month, or 3 times, or once a month. And then my employer finds out and they begin to put pressure on them. So these kinds of things are happening. But what's not happening, and why some of the scores, why it is lower, is because they're not lining people up and shooting them. At least that we're aware of. But we have to be clear, that's happening some places in the world. When you're a Christian in Somalia, if you're found to be there, you might literally lose your head. You're going to be killed in North Korea. You're going to be killed in Afghanistan for being a follower of Jesus. So it's more to do with the relative extreme brutality in the upper parts of the list than it does by any good behavior on China. China has figured out, this is a blueprint, which is why we're so concerned about it, for how a government that can centralize control and monitor behavior of people can squeeze and punish people without them ever leaving their home. And what you may see come online next is digital currencies, which will cut off the ability of Christians and others who do not conform to the government, the ability to do anything, even buy a loaf of bread. So that's why we want to continue to draw attention to it. It's like a giant siren going off saying, pay attention to what's happening in China, because it's a forerunner of things to come. Okay, see if there's more questions here. Diana Chandler from Baptist Press, what are the indications, if any, from Ambassador Hussein that Nigeria will be added to the State Department's countries of particular concerns, and what are your views on being removed? Well, let me answer your question in reverse, Diana. I have condemned, it seems blatantly political on its face, that Nigeria was dropped from the countries of particular concern. It only been there for 1 year after a lot of caterwauling from me and others in Washington, D.C. about what was going on since 2013 in Nigeria in the north. So it is there's no rational reason why it was dropped except that some people at the State Department were playing politics. In fairness to Ambassador Hussein, he's been on the job for about a week. What I do know about him in my discussions with him, experience in his role, is his strong stand on religious freedom. I believe that when he dives into this subject, he's going to be an advocate for adding Nigeria back on the list, but I dare not speak for him. But I do believe he's a good man and he wants to do the right thing. I don't think on issues of human rights that politics should be the first part of that equation, and clearly that's what was happening in Nigeria. Okay, there are no further questions here that I will address. I know we've taken a lot of your time. Thank you so much for attending the World Watch List press conference. If you do have any other questions, I hope you'll be in touch with us. Please do go to opendoorsusa.org for the list, any videos and information you might need. Thank you so much and have a great day.